Hi, everyone. I'm Doug Black, editor-in-chief at insideHPC. And today, on behalf of HPC analyst firm Hyperion Research, we're speaking with Stephen Ezell. He is Vice President of Global Information Policy at the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation in Washington, and recently at a Hyperion event in Washington. Stephen gave a fascinating presentation under the title Improving U.S. Competitiveness in the Global High Performance Computing and AI Markets. This was part of an all day session held by Hyperion on the CHIPS and Science Act. So, Stephen, if you would, please go through some of the highlights of your presentation, and then we'll follow up with a brief Q&A afterwards.
Well, sounds great, Doug. And thank you for the opportunity to be interviewed here and to have presented at your Hyperion Research Conference back in December.
Yeah, great to be with you.
So at the conference, I presented findings from a report that the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation had released in September 2022, titled A New Frontier, Sustaining U.S. High-Performance Computing Leadership in an Exascale Era. And of course, we had recently entered that era last summer with the opening of the Frontier computer at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, bringing the world into a new exascale era of 1 quintillion flops of computations per second. Very exciting. At the event, we had a keynote presentation from Senator Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee, and other speakers, including Justin Hotard from Hewlett-Packard, Rick Arthur from GE Research, Ram Ramaswamy from NASA, and Bob Sorensen, your colleague there at Hyperion. But the broad point that the report wanted to make was that a nation's leadership in high-performance computing matters for a number of reasons. First, just like with semiconductors, just like with AI, high-performance computing really represents a foundational technology and an enterprise's and industry's ability to leverage this technology to support innovation, to drive productivity, to achieve energy efficiency, really gives it a critical first-mover advantage. And so why it matters at a national level that a country have HPC resources is that it gives all the industries in a country that kind of first mover advantage. If the United States, for instance, had to rely upon other countries to provision HPC resources, we wouldn't be guaranteed that we would have first order access to them, right? So we could, in theory, be down the line compared to domestic competitors who might want access to those resources. So it's critical that a nation have deep access to HPC resources because it helps the competitiveness of industries. It also generates significant economic impact for industries and regional economies. Of course, Hyperion has done some of the best research here, but Hyperion's work shows that for every $1 companies invest in HPC resources, they would realize about a $452 return. So at the firm level, it drives significant economic impact, and then there's evidence showing that the industry itself, which may have contributed as much as $100 trillion to the global economy over the past 30 years, has significant regional economic effects. And lastly, it's important because changes in technological leadership in computing architecture can shift the global landscape of technological competition. So the point we make here is, back in the 1970s, it was really Boston that was the focal point of global computing. You had the mini computers, you had the mainframes, you had companies like Digital and Wang, and Boston was really the headquarters of the computing economy. Certainly in the United States. But then when we had new architectures come along, the personal computer, the advent of Silicon Valley, leadership moved out to the West Coast as we had new computing architectures. And so now as we enter an exascale era of HPC, leadership globally is up for grabs. And it's going to be the nations that marshal the optimal set of resources in terms of investments in R&D, investments in talent, and the corporate capacity to build these tools that drive leadership. So that's why we think it is important that the U.S. continue to invest to maintain a leadership position in HPC. I thought there were some interesting data points from the report, which generally suggest that the United States could use even much more HPC capacity than we have. One university said that we alone could use 5 times more HPC than we have. And according to a study commissioned for NASA, the U.S. Weather Climate Forecasting enterprise could utilize 100 times the current operational computing capacity that it has. So despite the fact that we have made world-leading investments in HPC, we need even more to support academic and mission-oriented and corporate activities. In a related report that we released the year before, we looked at what can happen when countries don't attend to stewarding competitiveness in advanced technology industries. And this was a report we issued called Going On to Stay Competitive in Biopharmaceuticals, America Must Learn from Its Semiconductor Mistakes. But the essential point here is that between 1990 and 2020, the United States lost about 70% of its global share in semiconductor manufacturing capacity, falling down from the low 30s to about 10 and 12%. And we contend that that was in part because other countries around the world were offering aggressive incentive packages to attract manufacturing. This is a study from the Boston Consulting Group and Semiconductor Industry Association. But essentially what they find is that on average, the cost of operating a semiconductor fab in other locales across the world is 25 to 50% less than the United States. And they find that depending upon the type of semiconductor chip you're looking at, whether logic, memory, or analog, that government incentives provided by these other countries can explain 45 to 70% of that cost differential. And so this matters because the insight that the U.S. had lost its certainly in the in the 80s we made 70% of the world's semiconductors, and now it's down to 30%. So the notion that we lost leadership here, again, is relevant to high performance computing because it shows that if we don't attend to our leading position, we can lose it. But B, this was really a fundamental insight driving Congress's creation of the CHIPS Act. And of course, the CHIPS and Science Act of 2022 was passed last summer by Congress, signed by the Biden administration, and it has 2 elements. First, this $52 billion for chips, or creating helpful incentives to produce semiconductors. It includes $39 billion of grants and incentives to attract greater levels of semiconductor manufacturing here, $13 billion in R&D, and a $24 billion worth of investment tax credit. So companies can now take a 25% flat tax credit in their semiconductor manufacturing activities. It creates other institutions like the National Semiconductor Technology Consortium and as many as 3 kind of manufacturing USA institutes to support semiconductor manufacturing. Another part of this legislation was in total $200 billion of authorization for science and technology programs across the United States. Important to recognize that most of that $200 billion was authorized, not yet appropriated. We have to have appropriations coming through the various congressional budgets in future cycles. But it does call for $81 billion more for the National Science Foundation from FY23 to 27, $61 billion for core science R&D activities, and $20 billion for a really interesting new directorate that will be focused on technology transfer and commercialization activities. Some more funding from the DOE Office of Science. But importantly to our discussion here on high-performance computing, it does call for some significant increases in the government's investments in HPC. In particular, the language legislation called for a 40% increase in funding for the Advanced Scientific Computing Research, or ASCR program, to raise its level to $1.41 billion by FY 2027. In our report, we argued that Congress should also increase funding for the Department of Energy's Advanced Simulation and Computing program, the ASC program, at a similar level to the ASCR increases. That was not included in the CHIPS and Science legislation, but we think, and we've called for Congress, that if they're going to increase ASCR by 40%, they should increase ASC at DOE by an equivalent level. One other program that has now been authorized through the CHIPS and Science Act that was an ITIF idea was to create as many as 20 geographically distributed regional technology and innovation hubs across the United States over the next decade. And why that matters is because we released this report in 2019 called The Case for Growth Centers. And what we did was we looked at where are the innovation jobs found across the United States. We defined innovation jobs as jobs in industries that invest a certain share of their sales into R&D and that have a certain share of STEM workers. And what we found was that over 1/3 of jobs in innovation-based industries are concentrated in just 14 US counties, mostly along the coast. And so what that means is that there's a real inequality of innovation opportunity across the United States. So this idea is to build up kind of, second tier innovation centers or hubs across the United States. And why this matters to high performance computing is because we believe that access to leading HPC resources constitutes a critical enabler of the innovation capacity of these ecosystems. So our report called for investments in these regional centers to be connected with the increased availability and investment in HPC resources at a regional level to be a local stimulant of innovation. Lastly, the report makes the case that if we want to take advantage of the opportunities in the CHIPS Act, of the opportunities in HPC, we really need to significantly increase our investments in America's STEM pipeline. Even in semiconductors, it's estimated that over the next 5 years, we're going to need 70 to 90,000 more skilled workers just to take advantage of the opportunities in the CHIPS Act. But more than that, we need, there was a study done by Brookings estimating that we are turning out 60,000 fewer graduates from our colleges with computer science and IT skills than we need every year. So there's a number of things we need to do to increase the digital literacy of the American workforce broadly. In fact, only 1/3 of working age Americans possess even limited digital skills, according to the OECD. So we need to do things like have all US high schools teach computer science, double the number of US STEM charter schools, create what we call a knowledge tax credit that rolls up companies' investments, not just in R&D, but also into kind of investments in workforce training and knowledge. So much more we can do across the United States to be sure that our workforce has the ability to utilize the wonderful technologies we're developing with high performance computing. So that was an overview, Doug, of the report and what I presented at your conference in December, and happy to take any questions or discuss it further.
Okay, great stuff. I'm really interested by this. Seems to be a burgeoning idea across many agencies, organizations, and thought leaders of these regional, you talked about this regional technology and innovation hubs, so that we really have a distributed network with advanced computing, HPC, supercomputing involved. And it's not just that they're discrete centers, but they're connected, so that there's much more of a collaborative, networked drive behind that, which seems to me to could be a tremendous asset for our national HPC competitiveness on the global stage.
Absolutely. In the report we released in September, we of course looked at the application of high performance computing across a number of the sectors of the U.S. economy, and from automotive to aerospace to pharmaceuticals, as well as to a number of mission-oriented elements like nuclear stockpiles stewardship, weather, climate forecasting, earthquake forecasting. And what really struck me in so many of the examples we had in the report was that there was a story to be told of supercomputing assets at a regional university that was a critical enabler of the discoveries. So there's some great stories in our report about how the University of Texas Advanced Supercomputing Center had contributed to University of Texas becoming a key biotechnology hub, with some special leadership in kind of Alzheimer's and aging research. San Diego, with their assets there at the university, is now a leading center of earthquake modeling. The University of Illinois, with its National Center for Supercomputing, really being a key part of the supporting the manufacturing economy in the Midwest of the United States. So there's a really strong story to be told there about how access to regional supercomputing assets is really a key catalyst of regional economic competitiveness.
Well, and as you say, you cited examples of universities and other supercomputing centers saying, we could use 5 times more HPC capacity. We could use 10 times more. There's never enough capacity, of course, because what these centers and universities are doing is pushing the envelope in areas of life sciences and other areas of discovery. So I think it's one thing we all love about HPC and supercomputing. It's always in its infancy. That's what I always say. It's always discovering something new and pushing forward. So you and everybody else involved in this doing great work, because there never is enough HPC capacity, and we need strong advocacy for it.
In the report, and I have to say that Rick Arthur up at GE Research was very helpful in kind of framing a lot of why HPC matters to scientific experimentation. But as he frames it, I think thoughtfully, he says, a researcher can only model a universe that will fit within the size of the largest computing resources they can access. Mm-hmm. So essentially, if your capacity to understand the computational fluid dynamics or the multivariate physics inside a system is constrained by the speed of which and the processing power of the computing systems you have. So now that we reached the exascale level, right, which is 1,000 times more powerful than the petascale petaflops that we had before, it does unlock the opportunity for researchers across a variety of fields to now be able to model systems at an ever greater level of resolution, detail, granularity, and timescales. I make this point in the report. It's not a precise analogy, but as we move from 10 to the 15 to 10 to the 18 with exascale, that likewise increases the magnification we can have of systems, whether it is looking at the picture of every cell in a heart as it beats, or the crystalline structure of new materials. So yeah, it's as he says, Rick says, it's a high performance computing, truly represents a scientific instrument, kind of like a microscope or a macroscope, in that it allows us to see things at a level of detail we just simply couldn't before.
Yes, and particularly as AI, HPC come together, combine their power in scientific pursuit. It's a tremendous trend that's happening. So, Stephen, thanks so much for your time. We've been with Stephen Ezell of the ITIF. Thanks so much for your time.
Doug, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.